Hey, I'm Coach T, and this is the first video in kind of a transition in this Python Quick Code course away from procedural programming and really learning the brass tacks, and instead transitioning towards, wait for it, object-oriented programming. So we're going to be talking about objects specifically in this video, which I'm thinking will be fairly short compared to the more tutorial videos, because I'm going to introduce a concept to you. And what I really want to do is just lay the groundwork of expectations for anybody transitioning from learning the real basics of Python, which are your variables, your operations, your loops, whiles, functions, um, basically the meat of what we've done so far, and get you set up and ready so that we can begin to talk about the basics of object-oriented programming. Now, just like with every video that I do, the Quick Code series is going to stay aimed at beginners. Hopefully you have come along with me over the last several months as we have been learning Python, but if you are coming in out of the cold and you've never watched a Quick Code video, welcome first of all. But be aware that a couple things here. First of all, in order to do object-oriented programming, you need to understand what a variable is in programming, in Python specifically, since that's the language we're working with. You need to understand how to declare and initialize those variables, and you need to understand how to pass variables as arguments into an object, a function. So we're going to look at functions as an object, but I want to lay kind of a key fundamental idea down for you. And that is that so far, as we've been talking about, this is an integer, that's a string, that's a float, that's a function, there's been a little bit of a white lie. And that is that each of those things is actually an instance of a particular class. We just can't see them. So it's a string instance. It's an int instance. It's that function that we're calling. We're referring back to the function. The function itself is an object. And that's true of most modern programming language, C++, C#, Java, Ruby, JavaScript. Most things that you're working with are actually instances of some underlying object. And I don't want to talk too far out of my wheelhouse because so far the languages that I'm comfortable with and familiar with are Python and C#. But when I've been reading my data structures and algorithms books, it's all in Java. And periodically I've had to also utilize some JavaScript for the different projects that I work on. So I've seen these things in different contexts, and I do know that they're there. So with that said, I'm going to transition over to We3Schools to show you a key Python concept, and then I'll transition into Visual Studio Code to show you how to think about objects to get us set up and ready. So with that said, I wanted to draw attention to this. I'm using Brave because when I loaded this, I was lambasted with advertisements for beer, of all things. I didn't think that was appropriate for a YouTube video. So here is We3Schools. This is their page on classes and objects. And there's a little note here that is really subtle. You could overlook it, but Python is an object-oriented programming language. So in order to get the most use out of Python, we need to start thinking about objects and how objects interact within our code. That is a little bit of an abstract concept because while multiplying or dividing or even the modulo, it's concrete, you can grasp what it's doing. What an object is kind of a soft concept. It can be many different things. In fact, almost everything in Python is an object with its properties, its fields, and its methods. So far, like I said, almost everything that we've done or built has utilized objects. They're just the underlying primitive versions of objects that are freely available through the Python, whatever the basic system library is. And we use them without even really thinking about it. And because they're so elementary, we don't have to go through the rigmarole of setting up those data types. That work has been done for us. But as we transition over the next few videos to talking about classes, we are going to have to start to talk about what is the syntax for defining objects, How do we build methods that successfully interact with objects and that sort of thing. So, all right, let's transition over to Visual Studio Code, and I will show you how in the past we have created an object and just start to lay the groundwork for what we can expect with working with object-oriented programming, because we have done a little bit of it. All right, so here we are in Visual Studio Code, and I have a kind of layout here, a definition that will help you as you begin to think about objects in your programming, because you're going to want to start to get really comfortable with this idea that the structures that you're building into your software are types of objects, and you have a lot of control over what they are and how they interact. That's a deeper level of programming than what we've worked with so far using just the basic primitives. So objects, essentially everything in Python is an object or a form of a data structure. That's what an object is. It's a data structure that is predefined, and so you can create that thing and change the values or the data that the structure houses. Objects behave predictably according to preset rules that you define or the library that you're working with defines. So, for example, if we instance a string, Python understands how to put together the string, how to allocate that in memory, how it can interact with different things, what it can and can't do. Try to do concatenating a string with an integer with a plus sign, for example, and it knows, oh, I can't add this to that. That doesn't work. On the other side, if you load up Pygame and you instance, display, for example, is one of the very first things you do in Pygame. That object, the display window, that is going to be taken care of in the class definition for that object in the Pygame library. You don't even have to monkey with that. The same is true of like a button in tkinter. I don't have to create that object. I can simply instance the object because the library has already defined it. So while Python provides tons of basic objects to work with, the real excitement here is defining your own objects, whether for a game or an application or a website or a web application with Flask or Django. Really, once you start to get your head around what objects are and how objects interact and how objects can hold and shift data, the sky is the limit on the type of thing that you can build. And we're just going to start to pull at that thread. So all I have here is a simple example of a defined object that we as the users can create in order to form a new object. And the new object in this case would be, this should be a return of hello, right? So there's a better example, right? So in this case, my function takes a parameter x, whatever x is, and if that x is greater than 0, it will return the string or create the string of hello back to the body of the program as long as there's a receptacle variable for it. So what I mean by that is if I just call my func and let's say I have x equals 1, right? And I call my func, this will work, but it won't do anything. Yep. So there's no output, right? It doesn't live anywhere. We have technically created something in the background. It's just immediately forgotten about because it's not stored anywhere. But in this case, if I do greeting equals myfunc, I've provided a receptacle variable, which I talk more about that in the variables video. But basically, this is creating a new object of the string class, ultimately. Python takes care of the details in the background for us using this other object that we created. So we can use objects to create objects to change other objects. You see why that might be confusing to a new beginner. So what you got to take away is that everything you've worked with so far basically is an object in Python, which when we say object, we mean data structure, predefined data structures that you can instance. And then once we start to get comfortable with the definition processes of new objects like classes, which is going to come up next, but also to a lesser extent functions in the past, then you can define how those objects behave, what and who they can interact with, even access levels, and then you really can start to build new software applications. So I am at the 10-minute mark I think there's a lot here in terms of theory, even though we didn't really code a whole bunch. And I would strongly encourage you to go to We3 schools and read a little bit about classes and objects and object oriented programming, because it is a very different way of thinking about how your programs will work, but it's super empowering as you get your head around it. So, with that said, I'm Coach T. I'll be back next week. We're going to do class overviews, um, and we're going to start to look at how to define a class, how to define a class method, and then we're going to instance it to show you how to access those methods and the data stored within the class so you can start to do it on your own. So over the next month, my weekly videos in Python, the Quick Code series, is really going to focus on using classes, class interactions, and some simple class-based programs. So that's it. Welcome to Object-Oriented Programming. We are definitely moving into deeper water, more intermediate water, and I'm excited to walk with you, because at this point you're going to start to fly all on your own. And I'm looking forward to hearing about the sort of things that you're building. So, all right, I'll be back next week. My hair will be longer magically because I had to record this one out of order. And yeah, we'll see you there.